Hey everybody, we're gonna be waiting another probably about 45 seconds or so before we get started. Again, thanks for joining today's webinar. We'll be starting in just under a minute. Thank you. So sit tight. All right. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Seth Foreman. I'm president at Socialsuite, and I'll be your host today to open today's webinar on ESG and sustainability for private companies. Private companies are increasingly adopting ESG and sustainability metrics and reporting. This is coming from investors, from larger customers, from regulators, and for many other reasons. It can be a really complex and overwhelming process for many. And many companies out there are asking the question, where should I get started? So today we've pulled together a group of experts that are going to be able to dive into this topic around helping private companies get started on their journey. So before we get going, we're just going to go through a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is going to last just about 30 minutes of content and discussion with the panelists, and then we're going to have plenty of time for a Q&A. If you look on the right side of the platform, you'll see a little group chat. You can put in questions in that group chat at any time, and we'll ask those questions during the Q&A session. We're also going to record this webinar, and we'll be sending the webinar out to everyone that registered after we complete the webinar today. And let's jump in. So before we start, just for those that are unfamiliar with Socialsuite, so Socialsuite, we're a ESG and sustainability technology and services platform designed to help public and private companies get started on their journey and progress their credentials. To date, we've welcomed over 100 public and private companies across 6 major exchanges onto our platform. And we're going to go into our panelists today. So today, I'm going to start on the left side here. So let's welcome Dr. Tim Siegenbeek van Heukelom. Tim's the Chief Impact Officer at Socialsuite and serves as our domain expert on all things ESG and sustainability. In 2020, he designed the company's ESG starter solution, helping small and mid-cap companies identify, focus, and report on their most significant and urgent sustainability issues. Tim has over a decade of experience around sustainability, driving ESG strategy, programs, reporting, and measurement. Moving on to the right is Christina Beckman, who is Senior Manager ESG at Culligan International. Christina is an accomplished ESG professional with a track record spanning over a decade in the fields of ESG, CSR, social impact, public policy, and sustainability. Her expertise has been instrumental in driving positive change in both public and private companies, where she has played key roles in developing and launching global impact partnerships and successful ESG programs and managing multi-million-dollar charitable endeavors. Finally, we have Jessica Ramirez. Jessica is founder and CEO of PeakEthix, a sustainability consulting and advisor group services company with a focus on EcoVadis support and improvement. Jessica helps organizations navigate the complex landscape of environmental responsibility and social impact, enabling them to reach new heights and success. With a proven track record of delivering innovative solutions and strategies, Jessica excels at guiding and educating companies and their employees to understand their full impact. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Tim, who's going to help get things started today.
Excellent. Thanks, Seth, for that introduction. And it's always a pleasure to have our guest speakers here. So welcome, Christina and Jessica. It's great to have you. What we'll do today is we'll run through the most important ESG value drivers. So we'll have a quick look at that. It's really good background to just get that really kind of fresh there in our minds. But with that as well, we'll look at what are the key stakeholders. So who really cares about ESG and sustainability data, performance, credentials? Who is that? And that is really that introduction there that really gives us a solid place to jump to the core of this webinar, and that is those real world lessons around ESG. So we'll hear from both Christina and Jessica. What have they seen in their career? What have they seen at the variety of companies that I've worked with and worked for, in particular in that private space? How is that different as well? Is there a big difference between public and private ESG reporting, sustainability work? We'll get to that after that. And then we'll look at what are some simple kind of first steps you can take. And we'll talk with the panel a little bit about that as well. What are that in that complex world where we're moving towards standardization and regulation, but we're not there yet. There's still a lot of complexity there. So what are some simple things to make sure that you're doing the right thing right now and not sitting there and waiting and missing the boat? So first off, I think what I want to do is look at the value drivers there. And this is already where we find that it can be a little bit of a difference what we've seen in the market between public and private companies. We have a lot of, particularly smaller public companies, and for them, ESG is really often on that very first one, a means to access capital. It's a means to talk to investors. It is news flow, but it's also demonstrating good work to doing credentials in that environmental, social, and governance space that we're doing the right things. So they're opening themselves up to a particular segment of investors that really cares about that. But there's a lot more about it. And I think that's what some companies sometimes forget. It is not just access to capital, or as ESG sometimes is framed is really, it's just risk management. Just need to just look at particular risks there. Well, that is important, but it's more than that. There's, of course, with that hand in hand is regulation. There is compliance coming. We see that now. The SEC has been talking about it for a long time. That has come a little bit to we're now at a point where, we don't have that regulation yet. So we're still working that out. But in particular in California, we see that that is happening now as well, where
we've lost him.
He had some really great points too. Seth, I know you're still here.
Yeah, I am. Tim will be back in just a minute. So let's give 20 seconds for him to come on. It looks like he had a little bit of a internet snafu for a second there.
Me. So although I'm sad it's him, I am glad it's not me.
Same.
And here he comes.
Just a hard kick out of the webinar room, but I'm back. Let's pick it up. I think I was talking about risk management. Is that where we left off? Wonderful. So with risk and compliance, on the compliance side, we see particularly the SEC now is doing a lot in that area. It's come a little bit to a standstill, although there's still some progress there, but we had already expected something to be in place, particularly about climate. But California said, well, if you can't move fast enough, we'll do it. So already there is now 2 bills in place in California that require not only public companies, but also private companies. And that's the big differentiator there. It doesn't matter what type of organization you are, you have a footprint, whether that is in the climate and carbon space or otherwise, you need to get started on that journey. So that is a compliance risk side. Then there is a lot of people that are more general public, civil society that are really concerned about your particular climate, but at large about diversity and quality and other ESG issues there that say, just let me know what you're doing. So that's that information flow. That's not just investor relations, but that is part of that. And the flip side of the risk management that's often a little forgotten there is the profitability and growth, or really simply put the opportunities. So with sustainability. And with, take for instance, the energy transition, there's a lot of opportunity as well that we should not forget. So we've seen companies that start from more of an access to capital initial kind of driver for ESG reporting, start a journey, and they found that quite quickly within that journey that there were massive opportunities for them we saw a few companies that created new income streams, one from carbon credits, and it wasn't anything new they did, they just never realized that opportunity was there. And then a lot of these things tie into reputation and branding as well. It's like, how do you present that image? We'll talk about that later a little bit as well, but when you do all these things, don't hide it on your website. Don't stick it 6 levels down in a place where no one will ever find it. Be proud of it. Be transparent about it. Don't overcommit, but make sure that people can find it. And a lot of people care about it these days. So before we look at the stakeholders, maybe Christina, start with you. Out of those value drivers, in your experience, is there any particular one that stands out to you that you feel like, yeah, that's one I've seen a lot about, or that's quite relevant in the work you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think for Culligan International, we think a lot about investors and access to that funding. We are a private company based here in Chicago and are not shy about the fact that we're on a pre-IPO path in the next few years and know that this is extremely important to investors and rating agencies, but also more importantly, really important to our business model as well. So I would say that access to capital is really important for us. And then just more generally, as you mentioned, as we're seeing more and more regulations happening, it is a risk and compliance program as well.
Excellent, thanks. And if I jump over there now, Jessica, do you have any particular areas here that stand out to you?
Yeah, I would definitely say the profitability and growth as well as reputation and branding. I think we've all seen some of these young people coming into the marketplace saying, hey, I'm not going to support a brand that doesn't have a purpose, right? And so they're really starting to dictate what are these businesses going to do to have a purpose and to make a difference. And then from a lot of my clients are mainly private clients. And so they come from investors, and even some of their biggest clients are coming to them saying, hey, what are your key performing indicators and what are the stats that you're measuring on all things ESG, and also, what can we do? Like, where's your ESG documentation? And here's some ESG surveys that we need you to fill out. And so I think from a profitability and growth and a reputation and branding, I'm really seeing a lot of this. And sometimes it's kind of forcing the hand, unfortunately, instead of it organically happening in your business. But I also think it's kind of getting those wheels turning and getting people to realize, hey, if we're going to lose our largest client if we don't start taking this seriously, or we're not going to have the right investors if we don't start making a difference and we don't start really looking internally on what we're doing. I remember this quote that somebody had said to me is like, we're not dumping oil into the ocean, so why does it really matter? And I think drilling into how you can make a difference, and you don't have to be dumping oil into the oceans in order to be doing something that's impactful. So I would definitely say profitability and growth, reputation and branding really stand out to me on the value drivers here.
Excellent, thanks. And I think between you both, really great. Now, you've already touched upon those top 4 there of the stakeholders. Christina, we heard from you about the investors that are really important pre-IPO. Like, that's a key area to focus on. With that, regulation is coming. So federal, state, local level, there's all kind of things that we really need to really keep a close eye on that will be required, whether it is already today in some places or it is really emerging and coming quite quickly at you. So be ready for that. And I think to your point, Jessica, yeah, on the employees there, a lot of people forget, like, talent is really attracting and retaining talent, especially in the millennial kind of space. There are young people saying, yes, a job's great, but if there's no purpose, I might find another job that gives me more purpose and gives me more fulfilling, and I'm contributing to a world, making the world a better place or leaving it at least better than I found it. That sounds, very, ambitious or but that is actually the reality of it. That is what a lot of people are coming with now. So focusing on what your employees want is a big area there. And the other one where you pick up on, I think, customers, clients, supply chain, throughout that whole value chain of a company, even, it's so important now that we see there's a lot of data requests and a lot of interaction between companies saying, I need this information from you because I'm forced by whatever stakeholder to do something around sustainability and ESG, and you're part of my value chain, so you have to help me here. So that is becoming more and more and more. And we're getting to the point now where we actually see that you're forced to do something, otherwise you lose customers, or you're no longer part of a particular supply chain or value chain. So it is becoming very real for a lot of companies right now, both in the public and the private space. So I think that's a really good starting point here. With that, Christina, let's jump into Culligan. Can you give us a quick intro on the business and maybe a little bit of your role and position in there? And then after that, we'll jump into both the sustainability side of things.
Sure. I'm happy to be here all. I represent Culligan International. We are a global water filtration and softening company based out of the Chicagoland area here in Illinois in the US. We are a very purpose-led company, really see ourselves as transforming the lives and protecting the planet for all. So we're all about clean, safe, healthy, and sustainable drinking water. We have a global footprint. We have about 12,000 employees globally and have 30 plus countries of direct operations and are growing by the day. So are really excited to kind of continue growing our business and certainly see ESG as a really important way to do so. I represent our ESG function. We have a small but mighty team of 2.5 or 3, depending on the day, and are really responsible for driving ESG and our initiatives here at the company. And again, really see it as a value driver for us, but also really see sustainability as in our DNA at Culligan, as we are avoiding through our products, are avoiding the use of single-serve plastic water bottles. So kind of our common enemy here.
Wonderful. Now that's a great intro there. And I think this is a busy slide here, but there's a lot going on, and that's always the thing. It's just sometimes, it's good to have a busy slide because then you see there's a lot happening. So can you talk us a little bit through, I guess, the history at Culligan of sustainability, ESG? How did you get started? And that's what most people wonder is, what is that first step and how did you got to where you are today?
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot going on, but it's again because we have a lot of cool progress that we can actually speak about. But I come to you all humbly as a practitioner in the field as well, and I know exactly what it's like to start a program and not know where to start. So about 2 years ago, our leader who heads up investor relations and corporate finance was tasked with starting an ESG program at Culligan. And this was because, again, we see it as a value driver. We want to eventually be a public company, et cetera. So that person was tasked with the materiality assessment at Culligan, which really brought together our pillars and our focus areas that you'll see here. And I can chat through some of our priorities, but it really helped us shape up the ESG strategy and program here. I started with Culligan about a year ago then to kind of take our strategy forward. So I came in with a great foundation of a materiality assessment, but then it's kind of like, then what? So the materiality assessment is a really great foundation, but then standing up the programs on top of that is a whole nother ballgame. So we've been really lucky to be able to kind of work lockstep with the program that was already set up for us and then really drive forward here. I'll pull out a couple of our most focus and material topics here. Energy and emissions is a big one. Tim, you've already kind of talked about how the regulations are showing that we have to report our greenhouse gas emissions, even as a private company in certain places in the States and certainly all across the globe. Our products are really looking at how to make our products more sustainable and to kind of design for sustainability there, but that through the end of its life too, how are we looking at circularity? And then also our people in our communities. So how are we being as diverse and equitable as possible, both within our own operations and also out in the communities that we live and work in. And then this bottom right-hand corner here is just kind of looking at some of our larger metrics. One of the things I'll talk about in a couple slides here is how we've been able to quantify the benefits of our ESG program. So it's extremely important to have the program and to be able to talk about it, but we're now increasingly seeing a flooding of greenwashing. So how do you protect yourselves against that? And I'm happy to go into that as well. But certainly the takeaway here is that we really saw sustainability is in our DNA and we didn't know where to start. So we started with a materiality assessment.
And I think that's such materiality is really to define what are the topics and the most material sustainability topics that really matter to your business, but also to your stakeholders. So it's really about getting focus, getting scope of what should you actually be focusing on. So as your table here, with the focus area, your material sustainability topics, it's such a crucial starting point because there is so much you could be doing. And across all industries and companies, that there's an endless number of sustainability topics and metrics that hang on to those topics. So doing that, taking that first step, and then really using that to inform your strategy. So what are you going to focus on in terms of reporting, but also in terms of improving and optimizing, and then really with that, then reporting and disclosing the impact you're having. So I think those three are really a good thing. And what we've seen is at Socialsuite, we more and more get requests from people to do materiality assessment. And it's definitely a bit of a struggle in that space where people understand that it's great to do stakeholder engagement, to go out, to talk to all your stakeholders, to identify those impacts and risks and opportunities that make up the material topics that you should be reporting on. And in that area as well, we see there's more and more regulation coming in Europe, for instance, where you are forced to do a materiality assessment every year. So that's just part and parcel of the ESG journey, where it's now just the most logical starting point. They're saying, well, you should be doing that. It is required. So it's a really good thing. But this is an example of how we work with customers on that. But maybe, Christina, can you tell us a little bit more? Like, I realized that you weren't around at Culligan at the time they did the materiality assessment. Do you have any insights in how they went about that? And also, it's not a one-off. Like, generally companies do that, ideally once a year to inform their ESG report that year. Some companies, when they do a very big deep dive, and they might say we do it, every 2 years. But what is your take on materiality, and what are your next steps around that?
For sure. And as you mentioned, it's really important to kind of survey the landscape. So what it did for Culligan was look at our peers and what they're going after in terms of ESG targets, but also what is most material to them, and then looks at what's most material to us. So I'm struggling to think of maybe a topic that wouldn't make most sense for us, like maybe something along the supply chain doesn't make it, like child labor, for example, isn't a huge risk to Culligan International, but it would be for a different type of company. So that wouldn't necessarily show up in our materiality assessment. The other thing that's really great about the assessment itself is that it surveys your own employees too. So a couple slides ago, when we were talking about how employees care so much about this work and how they want to be working for a purpose-led organization, they're able to kind of show their own voices and what's most important to them for Culligan and for companies to do. So that was really great. We got a lot of employee engagement. And then you also survey your external stakeholders as well. So folks who work really closely with your business or who are just practitioners in the field as well, who can give you kind of that broader 30,000 foot view of what's most material for you. So the last thing I'll say about a materiality assessment is that it's a tool. It shows you what is most important and material to your business, and then it's kind of like a roadmap for you moving forward, but it's also a shield. So if you have leaders or a board of directors or folks that think that you should be focusing on X, Y, and Z throughout your ESG program, you can show them the materiality results and say, this is kind of our true north and what we should be focusing on moving forward.
I think that's a very important and good comment, that final one. It gives you focus, and it gives you something to really take back to your board and say, we figured it out now. You had a chance, you had your say in the materiality assessment, but all the other stakeholders as well. And we know our true north now. We know that this is what we'll focus on. And next year, we'll ask for your input again, and we keep doing that. Great overview. So that gets you to today. Where do things stand, and looking forward, what are the plans?
Sure. So this is also a lot here, but I wanted to show you, sometimes when I join these types of webinars, you want to see what people have done with their results. And so I was really hoping to show you, after a materiality assessment and after you lay the foundation, what a program could look like. So you can see some of our accomplishments here throughout 2023, which are most importantly that we have a 2023 ESG report. Now, we are not, it is not completely necessary for us to do as a public company, but we kind of wanted to stand up that practice moving forward and also know that it's becoming more and more important with these regulations coming down. So we have an ESG report that's third-party framework aligned to GRI and SASB and TCFD. And I start with that because it's can be extremely daunting if your company has never done it before, and it really is a state of the union of your business. But it's really important and really showcases your most material topics, but also your strategy moving forward. So we're really proud of that. I'm happy to drop that in the chat and show you what our program looked like. A couple of others that I will pull out here is our carbon inventory. I mentioned that it's one of the most material topics to us as a company and probably to every company. So we have a strong foundation of 2 years of carbon emissions data that we've collected, and it's no small feat. It's a lot of push and pull with our specific business units to ask them to collect so much data. But with that, we have some really rich data that we can go after and set some carbon reduction targets that we're really excited about. So again, you have the foundation. You're showing that carbon is extremely important to your business. We've now gone and collected the data, and now we're in the thick of what are we going to do with this data. So it is certainly Rome is not built in a day and doesn't happen overnight, but we're seeing this progress year over year. Another thing I'll pull out that you'll see on the right-hand side here is these environmental impact calculators that we have developed at Culligan. And these are kind of a next step we see as kind of our gold star of our program, and what they do is truly quantify the benefits of sustainability of our products to our consumers. So you'll see here, I believe this is a hydro tap example, and consumers can now go on our website and start to quantify their own sustainability benefits as a consumer, which is extremely important as we spoke about how consumers want to see more and more of this from companies. But what's important about this from a practitioner standpoint is that we're seeing more and more greenwashing in this space. So we should care about that as people who are driving these programs ourselves. But most importantly, there are some regulations coming out of the EU that says if you have sustainability claims on your products, you have to back that data up. So now we have third-party vetted proprietary data to Culligan that says that we can back that up. So really proud of that. But again, it's just kind of constantly taking the next step. And I would like to emphasize that this progress did not happen overnight, but when we were starting to look at what was not only most material to us, but what's coming down in the regulation landscape, we knew that we would have to have tools like this and stand up our reporting standards. So really proud of that. But I'm happy to speak to more of some of these programs too, but just wanted to kind of lay out on a page what some of this programming has looked like for Culligan over the past year.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting in how such a short time, in a few years only, you've gone from materiality to strategy to reporting, and then you're demonstrating the impact, but also setting targets, looking at impact and life cycle calculation. So a lot of work has happened. And I think that sequencing is really key there, is that you don't try to do all of that work at once from day one, but you do have a plan there. You know what the steps are that you need to take. And some companies will go faster, some companies will go slower, everyone at their own pace. But it's really good to see that journey like beautifully unfold there. So for now, I want to jump over to Jessica. There's a lot more to talk about there. So thanks for sharing. We'll get back a bit later. Probably already see some questions for you to think about in the chat. Jessica, can you share with us PeakEthix, a sustainability consulting company, and in particular there, I think that your expertise at EcoVadis, and you're also one of the key ESG raters and scoring agencies that is really going through a lot of growth. You see that name pop up all over the place there, and people always wonder, what is it? Should I be worried about it? And you have a lot of expertise in that area as well, besides a lot more. So a little bit of background about, where you're coming from with PeakEthix would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Great job, Christina. It's so nice to hear about your company. We didn't really do a dry run for all this stuff, so I didn't know a lot about Culligan, but it was really interesting to hear what you had to say. So I created the company called PeakEthix. It's a sustainability consulting and advisory business helping individuals and companies on their ESG journey. And I work with companies from all different industries, all different sizes, all over the world, really helping them to strategize and find solutions to to catapult them on their ESG road to success. And one of those efforts is through EcoVadis assessment. I have a lot of clients coming to me saying, hey, I have this client that said, if I don't get a certain score on EcoVadis, then they're not going to, continue with our partnership. And I've had investors saying, we really need help to get our portfolio company to do better on their EcoVadis assessment for various different reasons. And so, prior to PeakEthix, I was an SVP of Sustainability Workplace Experience at a tech company for over a decade and did many different things, wore many different hats. But one of the things I'm really proud of is creating and implementing our entire ESG program and developing an employee donation matching program and green dream teams. And I think if there's anyone on this call that's kind of at the very beginning of their journey or really new to starting out, there's so many different things that you can do. There's so many opportunities, and you don't need a lot of money. And you don't, if you have a CFO that says, hey, I don't have money to give to you, but I really want you to run this program. There's so many things you can do. So I might, kind of bring it back to the basics a little bit for anyone that might be a little bit earlier in their journey. But I'm really excited to share my insights and my knowledge from my experiences and hopefully help everyone on their journey wherever that may be for them today. So yeah, it's really exciting.
And I think that's such a good point there that you pick up on, is that a lot of companies at that early stage are struggling with, we don't have budget for this. Yeah. So how are we going to do this? I want to do all these things, materiality, and I go to a consultant and it's, $200K, like up, that's not the right place to start, but it's in our budget. So what are some of the small things you can get to, can get started with to either get budget, get understanding in the business, and really take those first steps there? And I think you've summarized some of the things here about what you've learned on the journey. So yeah, I'd love for you to unpack that a bit more about how you think that people, what you've seen, how can people, get started and move towards that, getting to the stage where Christina is effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with some of the things I've learned, which I don't think I realized early on in my sustainability journey, is that how all encompassing ESG is. And it really does target every single aspect of your business. And if it's done right, it's really ingrained in every single day-to-day of your business, as well as your personal life. So from a business perspective, you're working with all different departments. You're working with operations, you're working with finance, human resources, sales, product and development, real estate, procurement. And so you're really diving into every aspect of the business. But then also you have to think from a personal perspective. ESG is really focused on yourself too, and your health, your diet, your well-being, your mental well-being, the way that you live, your community. So I love that ESG kind of focuses on everything that you do. And because of that, it also gives you these endless opportunities. We know sustainability isn't going away. We mentioned that previously about how clients and young folks and everyone else is saying what they need from businesses. But you really focus on where are your materials coming from? Who are your suppliers? All the way into how do you operate your business? What are your policies and procedures? All the way to the end product of what are the effects that you have on society and what are you doing for your planet? And so the possibilities are really endless. I've learned so much, and I learn every single day, which is something that I love. I also have tons of clients coming to me that they're working with someone head of legal or someone that's in charge of human resources who says, hey, I've been tasked with ESG and I don't know anything about sustainability. I still have another full-time job like this. I have a full-time job with requirements that I have to meet. And how am I supposed to do sustainability as well? And so my big thing for that, if you're in those shoes right now and you're like, hey, that's me right now, it's okay. You don't have to have ESG in your title. You don't need experience. You don't need an entire team behind you. You can make a difference. Just small things will make a difference. You're going to have to tap into all your resources and all your various departments to come together as a team, but you can do it. And so just be confident and you will make it through. So don't worry about that. We talked earlier about employees, and I think when you think of your stakeholders, you're thinking of your clients, you're thinking of your investors, but your employees really matter. And it matters how you take care of each other and how you treat people, especially if you're on the executive team or if you're in management. I really believe that the way that you treat your employees makes a difference for the success or the failure of your business. And at every single level, like you can't just focus on your senior management. You have to focus on every single employee at every single level, at every single location. Let their voices be heard and make sure that they're taken care of. And I really do feel like that humanizes your workplace. It creates this buzz that really becomes kind of unstoppable and impossible to ignore. And I know from my ESG journey, I really focused on my employee base, and I think it really made a difference. And you're going to get those naysayers. You're going to get that lack of support. Your CFO may say, hey, I don't get this. It feels like it costs more money than what I'm getting in return, right? We've been there. We've done that. Be patient and just persevere and be passionate. And I do believe that it's infectious and people will feed off your energy. They're going to feed off your spirit. And one of the most rewarding parts of my career has been seeing that transformation, not just in people, but also in companies where they start to come around and they start to understand and believe like all the things that come from ESG. So, I mean, I tried to narrow that down into like a really small bucket, but I've learned a whole lot. But that's some of the highlights that I hope resonate with a lot of folks on this call. And then Tim, you asked like, what do you do? So what do you do if you're not doing a materiality assessment so far? And I really believe that if you think creatively and you think unconventionally, you can really do some great things. So if your company hasn't done engagement surveys, that's really huge. Like tap into your audience, find out what you're doing well as a business, what you're not doing well, where you could be doing better, or what matters to them. Sometimes we think we know and we don't know. Something else that's really important that you're going to see a lot of is key performing indicators. So, tracking your metrics and your measurements. So understanding, what's your, male to female ratio, or how many people have been recruited internally? What's your number of corruption incidences? Like all these things are really important. If you can start to track those things and keep track of it year over year, it's not only great for your investors, but it's just great internally to kind of see how you're improving. And creating some grassroots efforts. So I had created a philanthropy and awareness team, green dream teams. You can have affinity groups. So working parents, veterans, minority groups. I know one of the questions had asked, like, how do you kind of like tap into your audience if it's a hybrid workplace? You can do benefits for people who ride a bike or walk to work if they're happening to walk to work, or you can give them a checklist item for homes that says, hey, what are you doing at home? Are you leaving all your lights on? If you use these special, various outlets, they can save energy. There's different things that you can do kind of thinking creatively and really unconventionally. And then, consolidate and simplify. I think when you're focusing on your policies and procedures, the point of your policies and procedures is to protect your business and to also protect your employees. And so if you can focus on consolidating those, making them global where they're able to be global, and making sure that they're concise and to the point and digestible, like easy to read, there's not just all this language, that's really going to be helpful for you, not just from a policy and procedure standpoint, but also from a presentation standpoint. If you're speaking on ESG and you're talking to an audience, you want to keep it short and simple. You don't want to get into all these acronyms, ESG and CSR and, all these different things. If you do use acronyms, explain them and really like try not to get into the weeds. Speak to your audience as though maybe they have never heard of ESG, or many of them have not. And then we get into like doing a sustainability assessment like EcoVadis I mentioned. That's going to allow you to kind of see where you stand, where your gaps are, and where you can improve. The materiality assessments are really key to find those material issues important to your stakeholders. You kind of have a direction and a way to go. And I think Socialsuite, you guys coming out with this platform is so key, because normally you'd have to hire a consultant to do that. And sometimes those consultants can be really expensive. And so you might not, same thing, have the budget for that. Carbon footprints are important. We all know that, but they're also time consuming, extremely time consuming, and also expensive. So you have to find the resources to do those things. And then, just to kind of wrap it up, I think educating and sharing your knowledge and communicating about it is so important. Knowledge is power. It's learning opportunities for you to be vulnerable and empower others by educating them and letting them learn from you. And it's not just about your executive team or your fellow employees. Educate your family, educate your friends, let that word kind of spread, and talk about it at executive levels, board meetings, company-wide meetings. Get in there and start talking about it, start communicating about it. And that's going to really start to get the excitement going and flow through the organization. So those are just some key things that I felt like would be really helpful for this audience, hopefully.
Thanks, Jessica, for sharing that. And I think it all comes down to, creating that culture, and that with that culture, it is about that ESG is just another lens to look at the work you're doing. So making a decision or governing your operations, or running the operation, so to say, you always think about, you use certain lenses from, financial lens, but in this case, you use a more sustainability lens. So to your point, sustainability doesn't have to be in your job title. Everyone should be using it. And if you build that culture there, then With that, it becomes a lot easier to do all the other things there, collecting the data, because people are now aware of it, that things are important. And when you start collecting data, it's only a small step to go into one of those frameworks that Christina mentioned about GRI or CESP, because that is effectively reporting that data. So by ensuring that you build internal capacity and capability around ESG and creating that culture, what that means is that you no longer have to go external and find a consultant and say, go through my business, write me a report. Once it's done, I won't see you for 11 months, and next year we'll do a sprint again, and nothing changes. It is about taking ownership, and it's about taking small steps internally to build a culture to be able to do that. Because once you start doing that, you also see those opportunities we spoke about earlier. If you just, give it to external people, say, write me a report, find the data, you don't actually get the benefits from ESG. So with that, I want to jump over. We have had some questions around prior to the webinar about, is there a massive difference between public and private companies around ESG and sustainability? I think the short answer is less and less and less. Like, organizations need to start doing this, regardless of whether you're public, private, non-profit, or another type of organization. But there are always some small things there. So if we look at regulatory requirements, it depends a little bit where you are. Sometimes it's just public companies that need to at first start with reporting certain things. But then we look at that, what we've seen happen in California is for both public and private companies. So there's more and more of that focus. In Europe, the same thing. So that gap there is definitely getting a lot smaller. So I don't think that the regulatory requirements are something to really kind of position public versus private against. It's good to just keep a close eye on what it means to your particular business. Then there's the transparency and disclosure. So, there's the difference sometimes that people position where you're a public company, it's all about shareholders, and otherwise you're more focused on your consumers. There's less focus from, shareholder. I think that's less as well. Civil society at large doesn't care about who your product or services are from a public or private company. They care about how you run your business. So it's really about looking at, again, who are your key stakeholders there? What is the data they demand from you? But being aware that you probably don't have one stakeholder. There's a whole range of stakeholders, and they all want to know what you're doing. Then there's the investor expectations. Now, there's a little bit of difference there, but I think that it's mostly geographically. And yes, public companies have, a large set of investors, institutional investors that require things. There's more geographically. I think Europe is very much the front runner there. Every investor knows what they want. If you go to the US, if you go to Australia, you get a bit more, they're not always sure exactly what they're after, but if you can give them something, they might be happy. But they're catching up quite quickly. So again, not a massive difference there between, per se, public and private, but geographically it might be, some investors are still catching up. Then there's the access to capital. Well, I think that is more, we see ESG integration really happening in all kinds of capital allocation. So it's not just investors. We also see it at banks, at insurers. They're all taking their sustainability credentials in there. So that gap is getting a lot smaller as well there, regardless of where you get your capital or where you're looking for insurance. People are asking you questions, sending you questionnaires. Stakeholder pressure, you get public scrutiny from everyone. So that's everywhere. That's what I already said. So I think that's less as well. Some people argue that public companies have more of a public profile, so they get more scrutiny and they should be, running ESG programs more visibly. I think that's, again, less and less in the market, what we're looking at right now. And there's one there, but people have argued it around ESG strategy, that private companies are sometimes in a position where they can have a bit more of a long-term view, rather than really needing to be focused on short-term financial outcomes for their shareholders. So that if you're a private company, you might be in a position where you can have a longer-term ESG strategy and spend a bit more thinking about that. Whereas on the short term, your financial outcomes every quarter, focus on that. ESG is a bit more compartmentalized. I think that's not a massive difference, but it's worth mentioning there. And in the end, if we look at that, it doesn't matter, like I said, what business you are. Sustainability, ESG are just about doing good business for people, planet, and profit. Not to forget that last one, because we're still doing business here. So that's a quick overview there. The final one then, I think, Jessica, is going a little bit back to your slide there as well, trying to capture some of that. really trying to, so I've seen there's already a lot of questions in the Q&A. If you've got any more, put them in. After this, we'll go straight into that. The final things there, I think this goes, yes, for private companies, but for any company, and that is at the start of their journey, do one thing and do it well. So just don't get overwhelmed by all these things you've heard today. We would still recommend a materiality assessment is a really good starting point. But after that, don't sit still and think, I've done it now. No, it's just your starting point. So don't go to overwhelm, get started and move on from there. And talk to people, talk to peers, talk to people in your situation, different companies, talk to experts, whether they be people like, like us, Socialsuite, at a technology platform, or other experts that can help you. You can get a lot of insights there. So determine that materiality, and in doing that, listen to your stakeholders. So that gives you, for that next step as well, some idea of what should you be focusing on. We saw with Culligan, the focus area, the material areas, in what areas you should be looking for metrics to report on, looking for areas to optimize your work in, and embrace that ESG mindset, the culture, and that, make it business as usual. It's really important there. So don't isolate ESG to a shared desk in the corner. No, make it part and parcel of what everyone's doing. And take stock and share. So many companies, to your point or earlier, Jessica, they already have KPIs. They're reporting data. They know, their male-female ratios. That is all ESG data, but you might not have framed it that way. So once you look at that, you realize I got half of it already. I never bothered. I never found a way to report that in a standardized and harmonized way under an existing standard or framework around ESG. So we see a lot of companies struggle with those first steps. They work out the materiality, they know their topics, they look at the metrics, and they realize, I got half of that. And they're quite surprised then, but they're doing a lot of that work already. So I think that is something that hopefully is encouraging as well. You're not at zero here. You might think you are, but once you get into it and get a hang of it, it is not as daunting as it looks like. So with that, I think we're getting close to time there. So I'm a lot of questions. So I'm going to invite Seth back up on the stage and see which of the questions. We might not get to all of them, but we will follow up by email. Seth, have you found any questions that are really outstanding that we need to address before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, first of all, that was fantastic. Thanks, everybody. In terms of Q&A, we did get a few questions, it seems, related to communication to employees. So why don't we dig into that for a few minutes? A few people in the audience asked, generalizing the question, but how can you share some tips around how best to communicate to the employees in an organization related to sustainability? So maybe I'll start with Jessica, and then we'll move over to Christina.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it can be really tricky because you have, most of the time, your audience for your employees are not going to be too familiar with it, or they're going to be really curious about it. And actually, I loved when people asked me questions. I loved when people kind of started peppering me and asked me questions, because it shows that they care and they just want to understand. Same thing, like knowledge is power. They want to understand, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How does it matter to me? How does it matter to the business? How does it matter to our clients? And I think one of the things I did was create a green dream team. So I found people who were already passionate about it, whether it was at their home and planting and planting their own garden, or doing some things for their personal efforts. And so we tapped into that and created a green dream team. And then from there, we were able to do information sessions. So we did these information sessions where people could jump on. We did polls. So we sent out polls saying, like, what do you hope to learn in this meeting? What is curious to you? What are you confused about? What are you passionate about? And then we were able to kind of direct a lot of our presentation to what was in the audience, what people were wanting to know and wanting to understand. And we made it very open. We made it where it was not just presenting, it was also asking questions and feedback and talking amongst each other. And we wanted our employees also to give their feedback of what they've learned from their own personal experiences too, because there's a lot of knowledge out there that we wanted to tap into. So I think doing some panels, doing some webinars, doing some information sessions really will help you to get into your audience. And then if you're doing a big presentation, like an all hands, like I said, keep it really simple. Drill down to the basics. Don't get too high end. Don't talk about SASB and CSR. Like, really explain what you're talking about at a very granular level of why it's important to the business and why it's important to the employees. Yeah, and then do some like grassroots efforts. If people are going into the office, have a little something that shows that you're like buying from a local vendor that's, craft made beer or something, and that they do it sustainably because of something that they do. Like those little things that people can resonate with will really help to grow that excitement.
Yeah, and I don't have much to add. I think Jessica covered it really well. I think a really poignant point that she talked about is just the passion. Like a lot of times when we're talking about ESG, especially as practitioners, we're talking about the doom and gloom and the planet's on fire and there's all these regulations. But I think coming to your employee base as like, this is a really great value driver for ourselves personally. And this is our purpose out in the world. And this is what we care about as a company, and we care about our people and our planet. I think it cannot be underestimated how important that message is for employees sometimes. And beyond that, I mean, I think what Jessica said is perfectly sums it up, is being as relatable as possible when having these conversations. But beyond that is like how you can get involved. I always try to end with a call to action, like please join our Green Dreams team, or please email me if you'd like to get more and more involved, because I mean, I think that the kind of industry standard is you just have a lot to do with few resources. So as much as you can beg, borrow, and steal folks' time, the better. And I have only found that people are extremely passionate about this type of work and are looking to get more involved. So certainly utilize your employee base for as a resource as much as you can.
Great. Thanks, Christina. So another question we had earlier in the today's session was about sequencing. And the question was, hey, I've ran my materiality assessment. We've selected our most material topics and risks and opportunities, but then what? So I'm going to take this question over to Tim. So from a sequencing standpoint, what's your recommendation after a materiality assessment? What should the next steps be?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question there. And I think there's a few things that come into play. So once you know what topics are really material and that you should be reporting on and focusing on, what we've seen with Culligan, a nice table with a focus. The next step there is to come up with a ESG roadmap or an ESG strategy, depends a little bit. People call it different things, but that is going to set out what are you trying to achieve over the next 6 months or 12 months. And in there, you want to do things like, the first step could be then that now that I've done my material topics, let's look under those topics. What are metrics that I can report on? And then you go a little bit more kind of granular. You're going to look at, potentially is there regulation I should be reporting on, and where does that fit into some of those material topics, or does it sit outside of that? So really making sure that you don't miss that. Then you might look at the voluntary standards and metrics, and we've heard about things like SASB or GRI. Look at, under these topics, what are those metrics that sit under there, and which of those metrics then are relevant to my industry or relevant to my particular business, and do a gap analysis on that. So you might have a dozen material topics or even less maybe. Look at those related metrics to those topics, do a gap analysis on what you already have, and look at as well at those topics, like there might be some overlap there where GRI and SASB are asking the same thing. So you don't have to go do data collection twice. Work out from there, what are you collecting? But also ask yourself the question, for whom are we doing this? Who are the stakeholders? And ask them about it. What are you expecting from me? So part of that roadmap is also talk to your key stakeholders. If they are investors, ask them what they're after. If they all say, I just want you to report on SASB, I don't care about GRI, why would you make that effort? Unless there are other stakeholders that are after that. So there's definitely, I think that road mapping and strategy is really important, to talk to your stakeholders, understand what they want, look at what metrics. Once you know those metrics, you do a gap analysis, and that will get you into that early stages of thinking about what type of reporting you're going to do. How are you going to present the data, and who is actually those are some of the first initial steps there. Talk to people that have done it, because they can help you really get an idea of how you can do that quite simply.
Great. We'll take one final question and we'll wrap up. So Melissa asked to Jessica, you touched on some low-cost efforts that companies can do when it's starting. what are some other things that companies can do when they have a bit more budget, but not a big budget? So are there any certain tools or other types of resources that companies should be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think outside, like let's say a materiality assessment or even a carbon footprint. So, those do cost money, and those can start to creep up in cost, especially if you're doing them year over year. There's a lot of things that you can tap into depending on your business with procurement. So, do you have a supplier program, a supplier diversity program, and are you focusing on your suppliers? Do you do CSR assessments? Do you have a tool that helps you on all of your documentation for your suppliers where, it's an automated process to make life a little easier? That's going to cost money, to document all of the supplier questionnaires that you're receiving, and also giving back out. So it's hard to know without knowing the business that you guys are in, but I think that there's a lot of other things that you can do that can obviously cost money. You can invest back into your business and into your employees. So if you're doing webinars, you're doing other things, you can start to supply food when you're doing those things and drinks, and you can start to have more, bring your clients in and start to talk to them about your business and what you guys are doing from a sustainability standpoint. So lots of other opportunities where things do cost money, where you can take kind of that next level. But procurement would probably be the next one, which is how are you dealing with your suppliers and how are you managing that on a platform would cost some money.
And just to add on to that too, I think once you've kind of established what your material topics are and what programs you're going after, there are lots of different ESG softwares like Socialsuite, for example, that will make your life a lot easier, whether it's carbon emissions or project management or supplier diversity in different programs. So I would say some of the non-negotiables in our current budget and at Culligan are specifically for programs that make our lives easier, whether it's for reporting or carbon or things like that. So that's kind of like the ground level for what we need to be able to do our job, because a lot of this is data tracking and lots of different stakeholders. So you just kind of need a software to help you do that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right, so let's close out here. So I just want to thank our panelists, Dr. Tim, Jessica, Christina. Thanks so much for joining us today. This was a fantastic webinar, a lot of good insights and tips for the audience. We will be, as I mentioned earlier, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar. And if anybody has any questions or comments about today's webinar, you have my email address, Seth Foreman, Seth@socialsuitehq.com, and Tim at socialsuitehq.com up on the slide. But again, thanks everybody for watching today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Tim. Thanks Seth.
Thank you.
Cool.